Can Ghana's new president remind the West they are dealing with a strong leader and not a puppet? John Mahama's victory isn't just about Ghana, it's about something much bigger. If you think Africa is just going to sit back and let the West call all the shots, think again. Ghana's shift under Mahama's leadership is like a massive thunderclap signaling the end of an era where Africa plays second fiddle to Western interests. This isn't just about Ghana's foreign policy. It's about Africa rejecting centuries of exploitation and taking its seat at the global table. But what is Mahama doing differently? Let's find out. Mahama didn't just win a presidential election, he won a battle for Ghana's soul. This is about economic independence. Ghana's been sucked dry by foreign interests for far too long. Foreign loans, foreign companies, foreign control. But Mahama? He's had enough. He's got a plan, and it's not to follow Western orders. Let's break it down. Ghana has been one of the most economically dependent nations in Africa, relying on the West for foreign aid, loans, and development assistance. But that system has done nothing but keep Ghana in a cycle of debt and dependence. Mahama is flipping the script. He's talking about real self-sufficiency. It's not just about keeping the lights on or propping up a broken system. It's about creating a sustainable economy, driven by Ghanaians for Ghanaians.
It is the reason we would be initiating important governance reforms and sometimes initiate severe measures in the next 4 years to reset our nation and bring it back on track as the Black Star of Africa. The journey is not going to be easy, my brothers and sisters, because the outgoing government has plunged our dear nation into an abyss. However, we are determined to work together with you to build the Ghana we want. And I am certain that we shall win the battle. We intend to work together to restore the shattered confidence in our politics and governance system.
This is about building a country that doesn't rely on foreign handouts, but stands on its own 2 feet. Ghana can't thrive if it's constantly looking to the West for solutions. And Mahama knows this. He's got a vision for homegrown solutions, empowering local industries, cutting out the middleman, and putting Ghanaian businesses in the driver's seat. He's aiming to boost agriculture, improve infrastructure, and invest in education and technology. But here's the kicker. He's not doing it for Ghana alone. Mahama's leadership is a blueprint for other African nations to follow. It's time to stop begging the West for help and start making things happen at home. But how does Mahama intend to do this without falling into the same trap of relying on Western investment? How does Ghana forge ahead without foreign influence? The answer is simple: unity. It's not just about one country, it's about building an empire, and Ghana is leading the charge. Ghana isn't in this fight alone. For decades, the nation has been fighting alongside other African countries that share the same vision. A united Africa, free from foreign dominance. Mahama's vision is clear. Africa has to stop depending on the West for everything. From Mali to Burkina Faso, countries are finding common ground in resisting neo-imperialism. And guess who's leading the charge? You guessed it, Ghana. The power of this collaboration cannot be overstated. The African Union AU and ECOWAS have always played vital roles in maintaining regional peace and promoting economic cooperation. But under Mahama's leadership, Ghana is poised to take a more prominent role in shaping the continent's destiny. The focus is no longer on appeasing Western powers. It's about building African solidarity. Ghana has always been a strategic player in West Africa, but Mahama is taking it to the next level. His leadership is about more than just diplomatic visits and trade deals. It's about building a network of mutual support. Think of it like a family. When one country in Africa wins, all of Africa wins. Mahama is setting the stage for a future where African nations stand united against the forces of neo-colonialism, working together for mutual benefit. His collaboration with countries like Mali and Burkina Faso isn't just about economic growth. It's about creating a solid front against Western interference. But what can be done? Ghana gave practical examples. Ghana just dropped the mic and said, "We're done with foreign military bases." The US thought they could just keep their troops stationed in Africa, using the continent as a chessboard for their own game. But guess what? Ghana said, not anymore. Ghana decided to close all US military bases. The closure wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a well-planned move to assert sovereignty, to tell the West that Ghana is no longer a puppet. You don't get to dictate our future, not anymore. The US had long claimed its presence was for security purposes, fighting terrorism and stabilizing the region. But let's be real here, Ghana wasn't buying it. The people of Ghana and the wider African community had grown weary of foreign military presence, which often disguised itself as protection while serving Western interests. When Mahama stepped into office, he made it clear that Ghana would no longer be part of that game. The base closure was an act of defiance, an attempt to finally say, we will handle our security without relying on foreign military muscle. But the question lingers, is this the start of something bigger? Ghana isn't the first African nation to take action against foreign military bases, and it definitely won't be the last. As Mahama's leadership pushes forward, how will this decision influence the continent's broader military policies? Are we on the brink of an Africa that governs its security without Western involvement? Ghana isn't the only one throwing out the old playbook. Africa's waking up. It's happening all over Africa. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they're all saying, enough is enough. This isn't just a coincidence. Countries across Africa are closing US military bases at the same time. Is this the start of a continental uprising against foreign military dominance? You bet it is. What's going on here isn't just random. This wave of resistance is deeply connected to Africa's growing sense of unity and a collective desire for sovereignty. For too long, African nations have been pawns in the geopolitical chess game of the West. But no more. Countries like Mali and Burkina Faso have had enough of being treated like battlegrounds for foreign powers to settle their disputes. Instead of relying on foreign military forces to keep the peace, African nations are taking the responsibility into their own hands.
Good morning, Gareth. Hi. The US military has about 27 operational bases across the whole African continent. Most of those are in your typical conflict zones, in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel region and West Africa, where the main focus is counterterrorism. The Trump administration had been talking about drawing down those military forces, but the Biden administration seems to be, as far as we can fathom from the initial Africa policy plans, willing to maintain 6,000 US military personnel overtly on the African continent. Our concern now is that a number of African governments are allowing covert operations not fully under the framework of their legal or constitutional regulations. For example, in West Africa, the small archipelago of Cape Verde, not many people will have heard of it before, but it's a very strategic position.
Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. This movement is far more than just a reaction to foreign military presence. It's about reclaiming Africa's future. The closure of foreign bases marks a new chapter in African politics. Countries are increasingly banding together, rejecting the old guard, and deciding that Africa can and will stand on its own. But here's the big question. Can this movement sustain itself? Will the West respond to Africa's growing unity with force? Or will they finally respect the continent's desires for sovereignty? Spoiler alert, the old slave-master dynamic is on its last legs. For years, the relationship between Africa and the West has been defined by exploitation. But Mahama and others like him are ready to flip the script. No more. Africa is looking for new ways to engage with the West, but on its terms. The goal? Fairness, equality, and mutual benefit. Let's not sugarcoat it. Africa has been treated like the world's trash bin for too long. The West has reaped the benefits of Africa's resources, all while exploiting the people and systems that make the continent tick. But now, African countries are saying, enough is enough. Mahama's vision for a new type of relationship with the West is rooted in partnership, not dominance. African nations, led by figures like Mahama, want to rewrite the rules of engagement, not as subordinates, but as equals. But the question remains, will the West agree? Are they willing to move away from the exploitative practices of the past and treat Africa as a partner? Or will they continue with their centuries-old mindset, seeing Africa as nothing more than a resource for their gain? This is the crossroads Africa stands at today, and how the West responds will determine the future of global geopolitics. Will they finally play fair, or will Africa force their hand? Africa is rising, and you better believe it's not asking for permission. You've been hearing whispers, but now it's getting louder. The next decade will not look like the past. The days of Africa being exploited for resources and kept under the West's thumb are over. A new breed of leaders is emerging, leaders who are not only rejecting the old ways, but are actively rebuilding the African narrative. Ghana, under Mahama, is showing that the continent has the power to chart its course, and others are following suit. Let's break it down. Africa is not some poor, helpless continent that needs saving. This narrative of Africa as a charity case has been drilled into our minds for far too long. It's a dehumanizing myth that the West has pushed to justify its interference. But here's the reality. Africa is rich in resources, culture, and human potential. And now, African countries are realizing that they don't need foreign powers dictating their future.
I think what people don't understand is how rich of a continent Africa really is. Do you realize, man, it's the only country in the world that don't have to import nothing. They don't need your food, they don't need your energy, they don't need your gold, they don't need your diamonds, they don't need your coal, they don't need your uranium, they don't need your platinum, they don't need nothing. Africa is the only country in the world, and they don't need your oil. They ain't got to import nothing.
From the streets of Accra to the hills of Addis Ababa, young African leaders are embracing the Pan-African vision, a vision of a united, self-sufficient Africa. Mahama's leadership is part of this broader movement where African nations are rejecting dependency on foreign aid and military assistance. Do we need a strong Africa? The world isn't ready for what's coming. An independent, confident Africa is about to rewrite the global rulebook. Africa is not some afterthought in the global power equation anymore. For far too long, the West has dominated the global stage, with Africa cast as a passive player, often dictated to, exploited, and marginalized. But that's changing. Africa is stepping into its power, bold, unapologetic, and ready to claim its place at the table. With its vast natural resources, strategic geopolitical position, and an economy that's growing faster than most of the world's, Africa is poised to be the next global powerhouse. And guess what? The world needs more powerful nations. In a world where the West has dominated for centuries, the balance of power is about to shift. The world cannot continue to be run by a few select powers, while the rest of humanity is sidelined. The West, which has long held the reins of global politics and economics, is no longer the undisputed leader. This new era is about multipolarity, an equal distribution of power, where multiple regions, including Africa, will rise to prominence. And that's exactly what's happening now. Africa, with its young population, resource wealth, and growing influence, will no longer be left out of the conversation. You might be thinking, what can Africa offer? It's a fair question, considering the decades of economic exploitation. Africa is sitting on a gold mine. The continent is rich in natural resources, some of which are not just important for the future, but critical for the world's survival. From minerals essential for tech production, like cobalt and lithium, to oil and agriculture, Africa holds the key to the global economy's next phase. These are the resources that tech giants, energy companies, and agricultural industries rely on to keep their economies functioning. Africa is the future, and the world is already feeling the pull. But it's not just about raw materials. Africa is also home to an intellectual capital that's ready to explode. The continent's young population is one of its greatest assets. With the average age of an African being under 20, the potential for innovation, technology development, and entrepreneurship is limitless. This demographic is eager to build and lead, not just be consumers. Africa's economic transformation will be driven by this vibrant, motivated generation that understands the value of self-sufficiency and is ready to take charge. As Africa's workforce becomes more skilled and educated, it will shift from being the world's supplier of cheap labor to a center for cutting-edge industries. Africa is no longer just a source of raw materials. It's a global player. The global stage is about to change. As African nations become more assertive and begin to unite, the West's monopoly on global politics will begin to crumble. For decades, Western powers have benefited from Africa's division and disunity, exploiting it through divide-and-conquer tactics. But Africa is starting to put aside old rivalries and focus on shared prosperity. This cooperation is already gaining momentum with regional alliances like the African Union and ECOWAS, which are building an economic and diplomatic bloc that is harder to ignore. With these partnerships strengthening, Africa will be able to stand its ground, demand respect, and ensure that its resources and labor are no longer taken for granted. Countries like China and Russia are already recognizing Africa's potential.
They are deliberately and aggressively targeting their investments in the region to gain a competitive advantage over the United States. Should this occur, the balance of power in the Horn of Africa, astride major arteries of maritime trade between Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia, would shift in favor of China.
We, the United States, is doing a lot of great work across the continent. I worry that it's not well known that we're providing this. At the same time, it's clear that China and Russia have a lot of influence in Africa. And this concerns me a lot. And I know it does concern you too. I mean, Africa has strategic importance to us for a number of reasons, including that many critical minerals that our defense industry requires are mined in Africa. And this is something that China knows, and they have begun to exploit. You know, last year, Senator Cotton and I introduced the Reshore Act to reduce our reliance on China for these critical minerals.
They're moving in with strategic investments that focus on mutual benefit, unlike the exploitative relationships of the past. Africa's geopolitical value has surged, and now global powers are lining up to engage with the continent on Africa's terms. This is the beginning of a multipolar world where power is shared among several regions. In this new reality, Africa will no longer be the underdog. It will be an equal partner, respected for its role in the global order. In the end, we must admire Ghana's decision. Ghana just did something that every African nation should consider. It told the US to pack up and leave. It's not just about Ghana saying, "We don't need you." It's about reclaiming sovereignty in the most visible way possible. By closing the US military bases, Ghana is taking a stand that should be praised by every African country. This decision isn't just political, it's a moral statement. It tells the world that African countries are no longer willing to sit back and let foreign powers dictate their future. Now, the Western world might not like this move. They'll label it as dangerous or destabilizing. But here's the truth. This is exactly the kind of bold, assertive leadership Africa needs. This is a wake-up call for the West. Africa isn't just a land to be exploited and controlled anymore. It's time for the world to respect Africa's decisions and treat the continent as an equal, not as a subordinate. The big question is, will the West acknowledge this move as a sign of Africa's growing maturity and assertiveness? Or will they double down on their old habits, trying to undermine Africa's sovereignty? Ghana's move to close US military bases could be the spark that ignites a continent-wide movement, and that's something the world needs to be prepared for. This is not just Ghana's victory, it's Africa's victory. So, what's next? Will Africa finally take its place as the global power it was always meant to be? Let us know in the comment section. Do you see more African nations doing what Ghana did? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about. The Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.